Welcome to Through the CSI Lens Behind the Yellow Tape. I'm Christina Brakeman and I'm your host today. We are currently in season 2 and this will be episode 4. So if you need to reach out to me or communicate or have any questions or suggestions, recommendations, please feel free to reach out. You can follow us on Facebook, you can follow us on Instagram, and you can even email us at through_the_CSI_lens@gmail.com for email communication as well, and I periodically check that. So thank you for tuning in and being a willing participant and follower and supporter of Through the CSI Lens Behind the Yellow Tape. Again, this has been a labor of love, somewhat therapeutic, a little bit memoir, a little bit real live scenarios and educational purposes. So wherever you fit in there, I appreciate each one of you being here. And remember, you can follow us on all platforms and hit the follow button so that you don't miss a single episode. So last episode, we talked specifically about death scenes, what those look like, what kind of death scenes I typically responded to. Remember, that's agency specific. Although other agencies may also respond to those type of scenes, they may handle them a little bit differently depending on the medical examiner's office and how they respond. So we kind of work in conjunction with them, remembering that the crime scene belongs to the police department and the decedent, he or she belongs to the medical examiner's office. So you have to have a good relationship with them in order to, really work smoothly, effectively, be efficient, and get results. So we're going to kind of step off of that a little bit, or I guess build from that, because we're going to talk about a case that I handled in my time as a CSI. And so for this scene, what makes the difference is that I did not go to the primary scene or the original recovery scene. I actually went to a satellite scene. So a lot of times in crime scene work, you'll find out that there are multiple scenes and they each have a different purpose, right? So you might have your initial scene where the incident occurred. You might have a second scene where a body has been dumped or dropped off, or, something has happened at a secondary scene. And then maybe you have the hospital. You need to go to the hospital because you need to respond up there to take photographs, injury photographs of any victims or suspects, collect, personal possessions from those people as well. So that could be a third scene. And then also search warrants that come during the process of the investigation. Most agencies will want somebody from the crime scene unit to be there for the search, and your primary responsibility is you want to go and attend the briefing and, look at the warrant documentation to find out what they're looking for. Make sure you know who the case agent is or the primary detective so that you can have open dialogue with him or her. And then, you assist them in the process of processing that scene. So where I'm from, the agency I'm from, my job is not to necessarily search during a search warrant. Do I search? Yes, obviously I'm watching, I'm looking, making observations. If I see something that I think is related or I recall being on the search warrant, then I will bring it to their attention. We'll have that conversation. And then depending on the outcome of that will determine my course of action. But the primary responsibility is the detectives who are on scene. And usually you're going to have multiple detectives and they're going to be assigned different tasks based on the scene or the case. But for this instance, I was actually doing a search warrant on the suspect vehicle. So we were in a controlled environment. We were actually at our vehicle bay where we would take vehicles to be examined for various purposes, not just search warrants, but, other incidents as well. But for my purpose, I went there for the search warrant, and that was based at our headquarters, our police headquarters. So easy process to get there, not too difficult. So on this case, this actually took a long time to get to court, almost 10 years, trying to see. I actually have my court documentation. So, and it kept getting continued and continued and continued. I want to say, let me look. I have my court records here, but I actually have my report too. Excuse me. Okay, so this incident happened in 2013, and we did not go to court until, those of you familiar, how long it can take because of continuances and all the things. What did I do with that? Okay, looks like 2025, we went to court. So that's how long this case took to finally prosecute. So just reiterating how important it is going to be as a CSI that you are taking copious notes, that you are writing a thorough report based off those notes, and that you take extensive, clear, in focus photographs. Because I don't know about you, but memory lapses, especially if you have a lot of tasks that you have to accomplish while you're on scene. And for me, I'm the only CSI there. They could have 10 detectives, but I'm the only CSI there to process that scene. So I have a lot of responsibility. So taking good notes and then really writing a detailed report is going to be essential for recall down the road, because you just never know how long it's going to be before a case goes to trial, or even if it will go to trial, because some people do plead, right? So on this incident, we had a teenage girl, and she actually, she had multiple siblings. Her mom obviously was a single mother, and the boyfriend of the mother, I guess, I don't know, I think that he was living with them or he was there all the time. Either way, it doesn't matter. He allegedly, I guess we can't even say allegedly because he was convicted, and we'll talk about that towards the end. But he was convicted of, let me see the charges. Gosh dang it. I had this pulled all up and then I got busy doing something else. Oh my gosh, there's so many charges. Okay, so he was charged with first-degree murder, which is a Class 1 felony in Arizona. Count 2 was kidnapping, which is a Class 2 felony. Count 3 was sexual conduct with a minor, which is a Class 2 felony, which is crazy. I think it should be Class 1. Burglary in the second degree, so that's a Class 3 felony. Abandonment or concealment of a dead body, which is a Class 5 felony. And then the sixth count was unlawful flight from law enforcement vehicle. So obviously he tried to flee when they were taking him into custody. So those are all the charges that were charged against him for the incident. But let me pull up my report so I can kind of go over that a little bit. All right, here we go. So obviously this is a body recovery. And so I wasn't part of the original scene where the body was recovered, but I have some recollection from what I was told. So this teenage girl was dumped in a dumpster in a tote, like a plastic tote, one of those that you would put your Christmas ornaments every year, or decor that you're not using seasonal, or maybe you need to store something. Let me see how big the tote was. Let me see. I know it's in here. I guess it doesn't really matter, but I was trying to give you context as to what kind of tote it actually was. Maybe it's further down. Okay. Well, it's a 30-gallon Sterilite storage bin. So 30 gallons. That's what it looked like, or that's the size of it. So apparently she was placed in the tote after he killed her and dumped her in a public dumpster. And then she was recovered. Somebody dumpster diving came across her. And then that's where we were contacted. And then they sent the crime scene specialist out there to help with the recovery of the body and any crime scene evidence. So that's kind of the backstory on the original scene. So at that point, what are they going to do? They're going to have a debriefing with detectives, find out what has occurred. Obviously, we don't have a victim name at that point because it's still the body in the tote and she's a minor. And so unless she has personal forms of ID on her, we're probably not going to have any idea who it is. So, they have their debriefing, and then the CSI determines how he or she's going to approach the scene, and she's going to go through a methodical process of documenting the crime scene as it is through photographs. And I've talked a little bit about the order of photographs with that. Then they're going to, actually remove the tote from the dumpster, and they're going to place that tote onto some type of a tarp that hasn't been contaminated, a blanket, a fire blanket, or something similar, because we wouldn't want to just set that tote down on asphalt. then that could cause, cross-contamination. And then they would open the tote up and then obviously made the discovery that there was a body in there. I don't know if she was transported in the tote or she was removed from the tote. That's the only thing. I do know in circumstances similarly, I had, which I can talk about in another day, but I had a decedent in a trash can and they decided to leave her in the trash can and transport her in the trash can to the medical examiner's office. I just don't know for sure if they removed her from the tote or not. So my guess is they did not, just because the chance of losing any type of trace evidence or anything of forensic value. My guess is that they kept her in there and transported her from there. So at that point, what are we going to do? We're just going to document with photos, things like that, to make sure that we document her condition as she is, the color of the tote, the height, weight, maybe not the weight, but the height, the length of the tote, the brands, things like that. So then you fast forward, obviously they're going through a course of an investigation, right? Trying to answer who, what, when, where, why, how. That would be the detective's job in homicide. And through the course of the investigation, they get an investigative lead. And then I'm called out to do one of the search warrants. And that search warrant was on the suspect vehicle, as I mentioned before. So I was there all day on the search warrant. I got there around 9 o'clock in the morning and I met with the detective who, informed me that they were doing a search warrant on the suspect's vehicle. And the detective at the time, requested normal stuff, take photographs of the vehicle, collect any evidence, process for fingerprints. And then she informed me that there would be another CSI come in and help with processing, which is unusual, just so you guys know. Usually we do it all ourselves, but for whatever reason, I think it's for time purposes, they had another one of my coworkers come and help also. So that coworker actually was responsible for processing for fingerprints. And you're probably asking, why are we processing a known suspect's personal vehicle for fingerprints? Because we know he owns it. We know he's been in it. Based on the relationship with the victim, it's plausible to believe she has been in and out of that vehicle, right? At some point. Of course, I don't know all the investigation and what they discovered at that time, but it is plausible that if there's been any length of a relationship there, she's probably been in and out of his vehicle. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what's the relevance of fingerprints, right? Because of that information. I would agree. It's more of a go through the process and also to try to identify anybody else who could have been involved. Can we time stamp date those fingerprints? No, we don't have that capability yet, but we can put people who may be of interest in the investigation in or around that vehicle at some point. So is it a direct correlation? No. But is it maybe indirect evidence? Yes. So it's still important that even though we know who the vehicle belongs to, and even though we suspect we're going to find their fingerprints in the vehicle, that we still do our due diligence and process it normally. So that CSI was responsible for processing fingerprints. So they're going to be using a black powder. They're going to apply it to the outside of the vehicle, all the doors, all the windows, the hood, the roof, the trunk, the gas lid, and they're also going to be processing inside the windows, the doors, seatbelt fasteners. There'll also be steering wheel, dashboard, glove compartment, center console, anything like that. They'll be processing for fingerprints with black powder. In addition to, if there's items inside the vehicle that we can't collect necessarily, maybe they're affixed to the vehicle, we would process those as well. Anything else we're going to collect, and we're going to let the lab process it. And that's because that was our policy for our agency, for our crime lab. Anytime you have a person's crime like this, it's a person, right? A crime against a person, and it's a heinous act, hence homicide. We are going to take what we can collect and we're going to submit it to the evidence section, and then it's going to be assigned to forensic scientists. And then the forensic scientist will then go to the evidence section and check out that evidence and then take it back to the crime lab where it's a controlled environment and then try to process that piece of evidence. And what are they going to be processing for? It could be anything. Could be something to do with firearms, could be DNA, serology, biological. It could be fingerprint processing. It could be trace evidence, could be shoe and tire. I mean, it could be glass, it could be soil, geology, it could be anything. So they have more equipment, they have instrumentation, they have more chemical processes that they can use. They have the super glue fuming chamber. I mean, they have all the resources at their fingertips in the controlled environment. So it just makes sense when you have a crime as heinous as this to allow the forensic scientists to process instead of using your limited resources that you have available out into the field. So that's kind of the caveat with that. So I know this going into it, that there's going to be limited things that I'm going to actually look for DNA and fingerprints. I'm there more to document the condition of the vehicle, photograph it, take notes, and then collect all these items so that it can be processed in the lab. And then down the road, the case detective and the forensic scientist, the forensic administrator who's over the crime lab will have a conversation about what they believe has the most probative value on the evidence, meaning what are we most likely to get that has the best chance of making an identification or an exoneration of someone. And so they're going to have that conversation, right? Because we're not going to process everything to start with. We're going to look for those pieces of evidence that will most likely render some kind of identification of someone or exonerate someone, right? We're not just in the process or the work of IDing, we're also in the process of exonerating someone. So for me, I go in there and I make my observations. I notice it's a passenger car. Obviously I'm getting the year, the vehicle identification number, the license plate. I'm going to document its condition. What kind of damage does it have? Any dent damage, any paint transfer? Are there any broken windows? Those type of, cosmetic things. Any stickers or stickers in the windows or decals, those are going to be unique to that vehicle because let's say during the course of the investigation, a witness comes forward and says, oh yes, I saw this, 4-door white Ford Taurus with a happy-go-lucky or, whatever type sticker on the window. And our suspect vehicle actually has that also. So that would help further narrow down what vehicle may have been related in the incident. So those are all going to be relevant that you're going to want to document in your notes and in your photographs. Also, the one thing that they asked me to do in this case is do a lot of measurements, which I typically don't do. Usually any type of measurements, sketching is done by our detective, but they wanted specific measurements of the vehicle and the tote. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. The tote that they actually purchased to see if it would fit in the vehicle as well. So one of the quotes I did, not the quotes, but measurements I did was measure the width of the back of the vehicle. That was important. I also measured the trunk lid, the width of it, as well as the height, because we want to be able to see, can we fit this tote that she was found in into the trunk of the vehicle? And then I go through the vehicle and I make my own observations. What is inside the vehicle that may be relevant to this homicide case? And also detectives are working with me, looking for those things, right? And telling me, oh, hey, I found this, I found this, I found this, so that I can photograph it and mark it and collect it. So numerous things at any point in a vehicle can be collected, right? I mean, I don't know how clean you keep your vehicle. Some people keep theirs immaculate. So there's not much forensic evidence there. And some people just live in their vehicle. I'm kind of both. I'm more of a clean person. Don't really live in my vehicle anymore, but there are a lot of people who do. They just don't clean out their vehicle. So some of the things we're going to be looking for are maybe clothing that belong to the victim. We're going to be looking for identification, maybe photo ID, a school ID, driver's license, something like that. In the vehicle that would point to the suspect being in there, obviously anybody else of interest being in there, because maybe they had an accomplice, right? Also looking for things that the victim had, clothing, IDs, purse, things like that, because she was, a teenage girl. Looking for purses, coin purses, wallets, cigarettes, maybe the victim smoked, maybe the suspect smoked, maybe there's an investigative lead that smokes a certain type of cigarette. So we're going to be looking for things like that. And then I'm going to be measuring the interior of the trunk width. We're going to I measured the interior of the length of the trunk. And then I measured the interior length of the trunk height. So in coupled various different positions, right? Then we opened up the rear driver door and I measured the height and width of that because can a 30-gallon tote fit into that door, right? And then I'm going to measure the frame of the rear driver door the height of the rear driver door and the height of the rear driver's seat to the roof, because did they put the tote on the seat, the rear driver's seat or rear passenger seat? And if so, what's the height difference between the seat and the roof? Because again, can that tote fit in that space? So those are some measurements that I took for the vehicle. And then we're going to be looking for anything else that might be related, like weapons, clothing, photos, cell phones, notes, handwritten notes, mail that would have put any of the people involved inside that vehicle at one point. And we know that there's been a sexual assault that's occurred in the past. Maybe it happened before she was killed. So maybe looking for prophylactics that he may have used in the incident. Or if there's unused prophylactics, maybe he has some in his home, or there's some in the trash can. There's something that can tie them between the crime scenes, right? Because one of the purposes is that we want to be able to tie the suspect to the crime scene and the victim to the crime scene. We don't really know where the crime scene is because she was dumped at a second location. It's highly unlikely that he raped her, then murdered her and put her in the tote and then dumped her in the dumpster at that scene, right? So there's another scene involved. Was it the home? Where was it at? Where was she murdered at? Where did the sexual assault occur? So we had to try to remember that we want to tie the suspect or investigative lead to those scenes and the victim as well. We're going to be looking for hairs and fibers, trace evidence, right? That may belong to the victim, that may belong to the suspect. And we're going to be making those visual observations. I'm going to be looking for drugs, because did he drug her? Was he drugged? So anything that doesn't necessarily look like a prescription medication, something that looks recreational. And then I'm going to try to collect those so they can do analysis to find out what those are. And then when they do the autopsy, they're going to be doing a drug screening on the victim. And so see, is there a match? Also, again, going to be looking for male, male for the suspect, male for the female, or any other investigative leads. Be surprised how many people leave their mail in their vehicles. Looking for keys to the vehicle, any keychains that may have related to any of the victim or suspect. Cell phones, we're going to collect those. Again, clothing, I collected that. Any type of rental agreements, maybe the car's a rental, or maybe they rented furniture, they rented an apartment or something like that. We're going to look for any type of rental agreements. Pay stubs to show employment. Where did the victim work? Was she working? Does the suspect work? All these are things that we're going to look for. Not so much money, but if there's money in the vehicle, we're probably going to collect it anyway, just for safekeeping. And yeah, so at that point, that's kind of what we're looking for at the crime scene. Plus, is there any bodily fluids? Is there blood? Is there what may appear to be semen? Any of that stuff. And so at that point, I used a forensic light source inside the vehicle, inside the trunk, to look for any areas that may fluoresce. And so semen fluoresces, blood will turn black because it absorbs the light rays. So I know that going into it. I'm not going to give you a whole, instruction manual on how to use a forensic light source. You've seen them. You go to Walgreens, you pick up a blue light, go look for scorpions. If you're out here in Arizona, they fluoresce. Semen does that. Some cleaning products will do that as well. So you can get false positives. Remember, this is just a search tool, not a conclusive tool. It will not give us conclusive results. So it's just like a flashlight. It looks like a handheld flashlight. And we use different color filters depending on what we're looking for. In this instance, I have an orange filter, orange goggles, so that I can see anything that might be of forensic value. At that point, I'm searching, the entire interior of the vehicle and the trunk, looking for anything that might be DNA related. And I did notice areas that fluoresced on the front passenger back seat pocket and the rear driver's seat. What was that? I don't know. That's not my job. My job is just to say there's something that reacts to the forensic light source. Also, I noticed there was some clothing that was kind of wedged weirdly in the rear driver's seat. You wouldn't expect to find like socks and clothing. Also in the trunk, I noticed a dry white substance on the rear driver's seat. I could visually see that. So I didn't necessarily need my forensic light source to show me that, but I definitely used it just to make sure. And then I would just be photographing the entire vehicle and its contents. So for instance, I would photograph how I would typically take my photographs. I would photograph any search warrant documents, and that shows who or what vehicle we're searching, who it belongs to. what we're looking for and what kind of case it's related to. So I would photograph the rear of the vehicle, I would photograph the license plate, and then I would go to the passenger side and I would photograph the entire passenger side of the vehicle. Then I would move to the front of the vehicle, photograph the entire front of the vehicle, go to the driver's side, photograph the entire exterior front of the or driver's side of the vehicle. And then I would photograph the vehicle identification number, either in the dashboard or on the interior frame of the front driver area. Most of the time we like the frame because it's affixed to the frame of the vehicle. But if it's covered or you can't find it, you can use the VIN number that's in the dashboard. That's on the driver's side. You can all check that out on your own vehicles. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inside. I'm going to photograph the interior doors and windows. I'm going to photograph the interior of the car, the seats, the seat backs, the roof, the floorboards, the back of the seats, the dashboard, the steering column. All of that is going to be photographed. Center console, what's in the center console, the trunk, interior of the trunk lid, underneath the mats, and where most of the time you have a spare tire. I'm photographing all of that area. Then I'm going to photograph areas that, look like they might have forensic value, like biological evidence. And then any pieces of evidence that have been identified by the detectives, I'm going to photograph those really well, making sure that I document their condition. Are they ripped? Are they torn? Do they have defects? Do they have stains? What size are they? What color are they? What's the brand of them? All that's going to be documented in my photos. And then I'm going to do the same thing with an evidence placard. And if you've seen those on any of the crime shows, there can either be numbers or letters. And so I'm going to place those around each one of the piece of evidence that I'm going to collect. If I can cut out items that I think have DNA on them or might have DNA on them, I'm going to cut those out. Or the least I'm going to do is swab those and collect a sample. So what I would do is take distilled water and I would take swabs that look like a cotton tip and I would collect a dry sample and then a wet sample and then submit that so they can run that through serology, determine is there any DNA on there, and then they'll determine is it animal or human, and then they'll send it to the forensic scientists that will try to run a DNA profile. So there's a little bit of a process there. So once I've done all that, we've finished and concluded our search warrant. I've packaged everything. I've labeled everything. I've taped everything, put my integrity seal on there, which includes my initials, my work ID number, and the date, and made sure that the packaging is filled out with the report number, the agency, the item number, what it is, that I collected it, and if it needs to be frozen to preserve biological evidence, or if it can just be submitted normally, and then I can submit to the evidence section. So that's kind of what I'm doing on the scene. In the meantime, my coworker is looking for fingerprints. So I will tell you on this case, I collected clothing. I collected trace evidence that appeared to be fibers and hair. Can I tell you that that's what that is? No, they're going to figure that out in the lab. I collected cigarettes. I collected a knife, cell phones, a photo album, some placemats, not placemats, but floor mats, some condoms. Also, the trunk release lever was broken. So that's kind of telling. That's the inside release that if you get stuck inside your trunk, you can pull it to get out and open it. And it was broken. So that was collected. We also found some pills in the vehicle. I don't know what they were. Obviously, I can't run a test on them in the field. So those are going to be submitted for analysis. And also some of the other things I did was there were wood boards like 2x4s and 2x2s in the trunk. So those were collected as well. And then I collected the carpet liner, obviously the storage bin that we had purchased to use during our examination of the vehicle, where we physically put the storage bin in the trunk to see if it would fit, and if it would the trunk close? And it did. We actually put it into the rear driver and passenger doors to see if it would fit through there. It did. Would there be enough space between the storage bin and the roof? It did. There was. So just something to note is that we actually went and purchased this, bin, and then we covered it in plastic. So there's no chance of cross-contamination of that bin, dropping anything in the vehicle or anything like that. So that was part of the forensic analysis that we did on the scene. And some other things that I documented where there were some medical records in there, some bank records in there, as well as employment records. We did find, I'm trying to see here, we did find documentation belonging to the victim's mother inside the vehicle, which we would expect to find. And we did find employment information on the victim, and some of her clothing was in the vehicle. But again, he's in a relationship with her mother, and we would suspect to find her belongings possibly inside that vehicle as well. One of the other things that we did for trace evidence, and there's a couple different ways you can collect trace evidence. One of them is by using tweezers, sterile tweezers, to lift and pull, not necessarily pull, but lift trace evidence that you visibly see on the surfaces. I don't highly recommend that way because you can lose it. The tweezers are not very good. Typically, they're plastic. So that would be my last resort. The other thing you can do is use like a lifting tape that we would use for fingerprinting or packaging and apply it to the surface that you want to collect potential trace evidence. But in this case, we had what was called a forensic vacuum, and it literally looks like a little handheld forensic vacuum. It's rectangular, it's black, and we have single-use filters. So we apply it to the end of the hose. So the hose gets plugged into the vacuum. It looks like, again, a rectangular box with all the mechanisms inside there. We attach a hose, then we attach the single-use filter to that, and then we basically vacuum the interior of the vehicle. And so I used one for the driver's seat and one for the front passenger seat. So we used two separate ones, and then also for the floorboard. And then I also used separate ones for the rear seating area and the roof, and then also used a separate forensic filter, vacuum filter for the trunk. And then those were all packaged separately and then processed in the lab. And so then everything is kept in containment. You don't have to worry about losing any trace evidence. It can be easy to lose or get discarded. So it's all kept in that filter for the forensic scientists so that when they get it, they can open it up and they don't have to lose or take the risk of losing any trace evidence. So it's very easy to use. It's very handy. I recommend any crime scene unit purchase it. It's only a few $100s. I think 3M makes it, but don't quote me on that. So at the end of the day, let's see how many pieces of evidence I had. There was a lot. 19, nope. 24, nope. Let's keep going. I'm looking at all my evidence vouchers. Looks like I had 36 pieces of evidence, which isn't too bad, actually. So part of my responsibility is when I'm done with my search warrant or my crime scene, I have to go back and download all my photos, right? Because photos are evidence. And then also we have forms that we're required to fill out, like our photo log. So every photo I take, I have to write down what those photos are in numerical order. And then also anything I collect, I have to fill out a form. It's called an evidence collection log, which lists every piece of evidence I have collected, including brands, condition, all of that. And then if I was doing fingerprints or serology collection, that would be part of my evidence collection log. So in this case, I took 311 photos. And then, like I said, I had multiple pieces of evidence. I don't know how many fingerprints were collected because it wasn't part of my report. And I don't know specifically what was collected at the dumpster and other satellite crime scenes. So that's kind of my process for the search warrant on the vehicle. From what I understand, a little history context of this case, the victim did tell her mom that she was being sexually abused by this man, which again was the mom's boyfriend. So the mother knew that this was happening. And from the point the daughter told her mother to the point the incident occurred, I don't recall specifically what the time lapse was, but I don't recall it being immediate. There was a time delay there. So whether the mother continued to allow this man into her life around her children after she was told of the incident, that was what my takeaway was. So mom was aware that this was happening, and the daughter was communicating to the mother about what happened. So, and at some point, the suspect probably found that out. And, at some point during an attack or an incident, a sexual assault, he ended up killing her. So, and then, like I said, discarding her, and then she was recovered. So mom did know. I don't know if mom was tried. I wasn't part of that trial. I can't speak to that. But I do know that he was convicted finally, 12, 13 years later, and he was sentenced to death. So he did get the death penalty here in Arizona, but we all know how long that takes. That could take another decade. So, I mean, you could be looking at almost 30 years after the original incident before he gets sentenced to death. I don't know what he was claiming, if he was claiming innocence. I don't know I'm sure he claimed innocence, but obviously there was so much forensic evidence against him. And luckily the victim had, communicated what had been going on in her diary, as well as communication with her mother. And she had written that as well. So there was quite a bit of evidence against him. So I wouldn't say that I was, overly affected by this case because I didn't see her. So it still resonated though. You have a teenage victim who was murdered by her mother's boyfriend, which is completely unnecessary. And obviously he was committing acts of, sexual violence against her too. So she was a victim of that. And it's unfortunate that she wasn't protected. And thankfully the police were called. Thankfully her body was recovered. And thankfully we were able to process it efficiently so that we could get results, right? Because there was nobody else that was indicated in this crime. It was the boyfriend. He was the only suspect. So some takeaways from this is that, there might be multiple scenes. And so this process can take a while. It can include multiple crime scene investigators get involved, right? Because if you have multiple scenes, that's not uncommon. You really just want to stick to your training and your education and your experience, because that is going to be challenged on the test on the court when you go to testify. Unfortunately, we had to go testify on this case. He didn't just plead guilty, which he should have. But the forensic evidence was so solid, they were never going to be able to dispute that. But we still had to get it, submitted into court regardless. So yeah, it's sad, she lost her life for no reason and she wasn't protected and she should have been. So it's very, very sad. It's very unfortunate. But again, it goes to show how many years it can take for a case to go to court and how important it is for you to write detailed notes on scene. Do not rely on your memory. Do not rely on your photographs. Walk through that crime scene and take as long as you need to make articulate notes, details, because again, you never know when it's going to take or when it's going to be that you're going to be called to testify in court as an expert in the crime scene investigation. And I promise you, you are going to be thankful when you look down or you get a copy of your report and you did certain things or you documented certain things, because your memory, you never would have remembered that. And just so you know, not all of your photos are submitted as evidence. So you're only going to have, if I took 311 photos, remember there's other people that took photos at the other scene. So their photos are also being admitted as evidence. So you might only have 20 of your 311 photos admitted into evidence. You better, again, take good notes and make sure your report is very thorough. You're crossing all your T's, dotting all your I's, because you don't want to leave anything out. So that was kind of that scene. Very sad that she, had to lose her life and that she fell victim to a predator. So it just really brings me down to this. Know the people that you have around your children. Do a background check on them. Find out if they have a criminal history. Have they been in jail? Have they been in prison? Are they a sex offender? Are they registered sex offenders? Do not just let anybody, whether it be at your church or whether it be at school or go to sleepovers, make sure you know the family they're going to stay with. Make sure you know the coaches that are teaching your kids. What kind of people are they? I mean, if anything's showing us in the media right now is you can never be too sure on anyone. Make sure you know who your family members are that are around your kids. It's your job as a parent to protect them. So do your due diligence. I don't care if they think you're crazy. Find out. If they were in the military, make sure you find out somehow. Why did they leave the military? Were they kicked out? Was there something criminal going on, or did they just retire or serve their time? Know who you have around your children. It is your number one job as the parent to protect your children. Do not be lazy. Put the time and effort into finding that out. So if you liked today's episode, you enjoyed it, I guess, even though the context is pretty sad. You enjoyed this episode of Through the CSI Lens, Behind the Yellow Tape. I would love your support if you would leave a review or follow us. It helps more people find us, and we can continue to share more stories with you straight from the crime scene. Make sure, again, to hit the follow so you don't miss an episode. Until then, stay curious. I'll see you behind the yellow tape. Thanks for joining us for episode 4, season 2 of Through the CSI Lens Behind the Yellow Tape.